This is the Bat Flip Podcast. Now here's your host, Damien, David, and Matt. Welcome in, everyone, to another episode of the Bat Flip Podcast. Damien and Matt here today. We're going to talk a little bit of Hall of Fame since that was announced today, the voting, as we got 3 new Hall of Famers. We'll talk about Tanner Scott going to the Dodgers. We'll talk about Anthony Santander to the Blue Jays, and maybe a few more items if you guys bring it up as we move along. But Matt, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm a little bit tired. I had a busy last week or so, but doing good. Ready to talk about some baseball. It's actually been a while since I've been on a full podcast episode. I've been helping out with all the all those season previews we've been doing. But we last week y'all did that Roki episode that went really well. So I'll give my thoughts on that here in a little bit. But yeah, I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself, Damien?
I would say it's not been a bad week to be me. There's a lot to be excited about here, especially as I'm the resident Dodger fan here. But overall, it's been a week. There's nothing. Sometimes you just have those weeks where nothing crazy happens. It's just been there. So Chili Bowl was this last week, and I get pretty excited for that. And was a really fun week of racing and watching Kyle Larson do his thing and that. So yeah, it was pretty fun. But as a baseball fan, I would say it's went really well, and I think let's just start off at the top. And like you mentioned, David and I did our own special Roki Sasaki episode. So if you didn't see that, what are you doing? Follow along, like, comment, subscribe, get in there so you don't miss these episodes, especially these breaking episodes, as we've done a few this off season. But we did that Roki Sasaki one, and went really well, and they got our thoughts on it, but what were your thoughts about the whole kind of process of this, and then like the final few days of the last, we got the finalists and then the outcome and everything. So just give us your whole perspective on basically the whole Roki thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised where he ended up. I mean, I think the entire time we were kind of expecting the Dodgers. I know you were a little bit more pessimistic, probably just being a Dodgers fan, not wanting to get your hopes up. But I think just about everybody around baseball kind of thought it was going to be the Dodgers or Padres, but it was probably the Dodgers. And I think Roki is obviously a super talented pitcher. Throws extremely hard, has really good secondaries as well. His command is pretty good. I don't think it's elite yet, but it's good. Um, and I think I think he'd be a good piece for the Dodgers. I mean, you wonder exactly how quickly he's going to adjust and be ready for the big leagues. He is still really young. He's only 23. And he's, I think there's been a tiny bit of concern about arm trouble with him over the past year or so. But he's obviously shown that he could get big league hitters out by, doing well in the World Baseball Classic when he was here, a couple years ago. So I definitely think that Roki Sasaki to the Dodgers is, I mean, obviously a good move for them. And, I don't think it's great for baseball when, a guy who's not getting paid anything, who has this level of upside, picks the Dodgers, but I mean, it is what it is. So, he's obviously going to help them. He adds pitching depth and, a lot of upside as well.
Yeah, I mean, and let's just stay on the Dodgers topic, and then we can go into the. I think we should have a little bit of a conversation about what we think this is doing for baseball, because that's been a hot topic here again recently over this past week. But let's stay on the Dodgers for this point, and we'll transition on to the next day. They signed Tanner Scott to a 4-year, $72 million deal to go into their back end of the bullpen too. So what do you think about Scott to the Dodgers?
I mean, the Dodgers needed pitching depth. That's the one thing they were missing from their team in 2024. They won the World Series anyways, but they weren't, this juggernaut level of team last year like people kind of retroactively think of them as because they won. They had a lot of issues with the pitching staff, and I think that they've obviously shored that up in a lot of ways this offseason. And Tanner Scott adds a back end arm that you feel really good about. Obviously the Dodgers had some health issues in the back end of their bullpen last year. So Tanner Scott had a great year, a 1.75 ERA. The only thing that concerns me a little bit about Tanner Scott is that in his past, his big issue has been walks for his entire career. until 2023 with Miami, where he didn't walk many guys at all. But last year his walks came back up some. He still had a great year, had a great ERA. The peripherals were still good, but it'll be interesting to see if he can keep that command that he had back when he was with Miami in 2023, because the walks weren't excessive this year, but you kind of worry a little bit about that if that coming back. Relievers are very volatile. Signing him to a long-term deal, you do worry a tiny bit about that. But I mean, Tanner Scott's the best reliever on the market, and he's obviously a great signing for the Dodgers. A lot of money for a reliever too.
Yeah, if there's one part that or one part of the team that I've been screaming about for like 3 years from the Dodgers is like I really felt they've missed a dominant left-handed reliever. For all of their faults, I mean, like they went into last year, and really the only left-handed reliever they had on the roster was Alex Vesia.
Yeah.
Like they didn't have a different left-handed reliever at all. Andrew Friedman was able to do his thing, and they found Anthony Bonda after I think 3 other destinations in that year. Excuse me. And he turned out to do really well for them last year. But I had always felt like they were missing that lockdown, not really lockdown, but just dominant left-handed reliever that like when you face these big left-handers, they can get people out. I think it's kind of funny that Scott dominated Otani during the entire postseason and his entire time in San Diego there. So Otani's like, I'm never facing this guy again. Just bring him onto my team. I don't want to have to face him again. Um, but I do think it really just shores up one of the biggest needs I feel like they had left, which was another dominant left-handed reliever that has overpowering stuff. So there's already been another potential bullpen move, but that hasn't been made official or anything. So we'll talk about that in a future episode here with the Dodgers. But let's transition to talking about. It's been the hot topic ever since the Roki and then Tanner Scott the next day, and that. Do you think that this is what the Dodgers are doing? First off, is it unfair? Is it bad for baseball? Like, what do you
Um,
think
I
about
think
this whole
it's I
situation?
I don't think it's necessarily unfair because I mean the Dodgers are just a good. I mean they're a good franchise, and they're doing what's within the rules. They're doing what they're allowed to do. I mean, and they're doing it. So I don't think that's unfair. I think that it's awful for baseball. I mean, I think that the Dodgers are spending at a level right now that everyone in the past has complained about smaller market teams not spending, and it's a problem. But when the Dodgers are spending this level of money that these smaller market teams could never dream of spending, it makes them feel like, well, why even try to spend? In a lot of ways, because it's like we don't even have a chance. So, I think it alienates a lot of those fans. I mean, obviously the big markets. You look at New York, you look at L.A. You look at to a little bit of a lesser extent maybe Chicago. You look at and then there's some other big baseball. Atlanta's got a high payroll. Houston's had a high payroll over the last several years. Philly. Um, you look at all those cities, and if you're a Royals fan, why would you watch baseball? I mean, your team just doesn't have a chance, and I think that that's bad for baseball. You can blame who you want to. If you want to blame smaller market team owners who because they're not throwing $200 million out of their own pocket into a team every year, then you can blame them. If you want to blame the Dodgers because they're just blowing and they're spending out of proportion, where a lot of times in the past, franchise owners have kind of kept it a little bit in line with their budgets just to kind of keep this issue from coming up. I think that's a big deal. But I think the biggest problem this is going to cause is in the next CBA, because like 90% of the owners are not going to be happy about this. And with the Dodgers and the Mets to a certain level, although the Mets payroll is somewhat in check, they had a lot of money come off the books and they just spent it all on one guy. Um, I think that we're going to have a big fight at the next CBA about a potential salary cap again, which has never been the case. I think the owners are actually going to bring that back up, and it's going to cause a huge mess
They
because
will never
they
that will
won't ever
never
get it.
pass.
They're not going to. I agree. I don't disagree. That's why I say it's going to be a mess, because that's what the owners are going to try to do. They're going to try to cut this. They're going to go all in on this, and it's going to cause a huge mess. It's going to cause another strike. It's going to be 1994 all over again. That's what I'm afraid is going to happen, because the spending from the Dodgers, the Yankees, it's getting so like out of proportion to the other teams that it's the other, 90% of the owners are going to try to go for something like that. They're going to get real radical.
It
So
so here's my problem, right? And you call me the Dodger fan and whatever here, but every one of these owners, they get at least $150 million from revenue sharing and shared TV deals and stuff already. But before any of their own money comes into it, they get $150 million basically per year.
yeah,
I dove down this rabbit hole, right? So before you even touch your profit from your own team, you're getting $150 million from
of
baseball.
course.
There should be no way that any of your payrolls are under $150 million. First off, every single team should have a payroll over 150
I don't
million.
disagree with that.
So here's my point. You can't get mad at a team for paying the money to top level free agents because you aren't willing to spend it. He
There's a
just
difference.
because
There's
no,
a
no,
difference between $400 million payroll and $150 million payroll. That's just
here's the
entirely
okay,
like,
here's the thing. If every team spent $150 million, there wouldn't be players for the Dodgers to spend $400 million on.
but they're all going to sign with the Dodgers because they have the other top free agents coming in
No,
too. I mean, that's the
at
thing.
this
Like,
point, yeah. But not like if the Chicago Cubs, let's take this for instance, right? David would argue us here. But the Chicago Cubs finished in second for Tanner Scott, right? They offered him 4 years, $66 million. Their owner, the Cubs are
yeah,
the third largest market in the game. Well, I guess technically if you want to say fifth, if you count both LA teams and both New York teams, was just claiming that they fight to break even every year. That's bullcrap. We know that they aren't fighting to break even. If the Chicago Cubs are fighting to break even every year, all other teams outside of the big markets are screwed, right? You can't tell me that they couldn't offer Tanner Scott 80 million or 85 million dollars and then he wouldn't go to the Dodgers and we wouldn't be talking about this.
yeah.
Every single person that they've signed, other teams, if they were spending more money, could have signed these guys, and they're not there for it, right? Like, it's just so I don't understand that people are like, well, this is bad. It's because like, well, then tell your team to spend more, and they
Yeah.
wouldn't have the players to spend it on.
Well,
Like,
part of the kind of my last point, we can move on because we've got another player to
yeah,
talk about and then the Hall of Fame. But I think my last point is just that I don't care who's to blame for this necessarily. I think that the thing at the end of the day is it's bad for baseball regardless of who to blame. I think it's bad for baseball that a team is running a $400 million payroll with other teams running $100 million payroll. If you want to say that those teams want to run in the $100 million payroll, need to increase their payroll, then go for it. If you want to say the Dodgers are going crazy and it's not good, go for that too. Either way, it doesn't really matter to me. It's bad for baseball, and I think it's going to cause a lot of issues, especially at the next CBA.
a
So,
team spending money is never bad for baseball. I'm sorry, it's not.
well, okay, then I'm
Your
not. That's
owners
not
should
what I'm
spend
saying.
baseball.
What I'm saying is that a team not spending money might be bad for baseball. I'm saying the disparity is what's bad. Whether it's the team not spending money or the team spending money, it doesn't
Well,
matter. The disparity is a problem.
the disparity is because people don't spend money.
Okay, I
That's it.
mean, sure that we can that works too. I mean, either way, it doesn't matter.
I think this has been our first biggest disagreement on this podcast. Might be people might
Yeah.
be enjoying this. We got our resident Shakespeare here. We need to shout out. Adam is back. Scott joins the fold with the Dodgers on solid ground. A southpaw slung a different hue. Hope springs eternal in Dodger blue. Lefty relief, a long held dream. A balance found, it would seem. Adam, congratulations on your Shakespeare Chat GPT moments. Um, and then he follows it up as taking a shot at David, who's not here this week, as Cubs are as poor as David's Hall of Fame ballot.
Yeah,
So
yeah, we got a
yeah,
poet. So
we'll talk
welcome
about
to the
David's
bat.
Hall of Fame ballot later.
We
But
got
yeah,
poetry on the Bat Flip podcast.
who would have thunk, huh?
Mm-mm.
But let's transition over to talking about the Blue Jays, because they came in second to Roki Sasaki. We talked about it. They've came into second to many of different relievers or players this offseason. Hell, they came in third place to a guy they actually signed this offseason in Jeff Hoffman, who had deals with the Braves and the Orioles.
Yep.
But let's talk about them signing Anthony Santander. It's a unique contract. It's a 5-year, over $90 million but it also has one of those swell ops in it to where he can opt out after the third year, but
Yeah.
the Blue Jays can negate that by adding a sixth season onto the deal as well. That would take it well over, I think it's over $110 million at that point. So, um, what do you think about the Blue Jays finally getting somebody to take their money in Anthony Santander?
Um, I'm not the biggest Anthony Santander fan. I know that I think you and David both really like him. Um, I like him. I think he's a good player. This might feel like a touch of an overpay to me. Um, like I say, I think he's a really good player, but he's kind of one of those like he's good to have in your lineup as an everyday regular, but maybe not like an all-star. And he's getting paid. I think it's five. You said 5 years, 90 million, right?
5 years,
Or
92.
with the options and stuff too. But I,
The
I mean
option would
that's
be like six for 110, I think.
right. I mean, on the free agent market, I don't think it's an unfair deal. I think it might end up being a tad bit of an overpay, and there's some contract risk here because this is somebody who has to hit to be effective as a player, to be valuable. He's somebody that is not really going to play much defense. He's not really going to run the bases very well. He's really tied up in his bat and his slug. And when he's slugging, he hit 44 home runs this year. When he's slugging, he's a good player and he's worth about that. But if he's hitting 30 home runs instead with this kind of stat line and everything, I don't know that I feel quite as good about this. So he's a little bit to me like maybe a slightly less bad defensive version of Nick Castellanos as kind of a contract type thing. And he got paid a real similar amount. So um, I don't hate it. I mean, obviously Toronto needed to bring in somebody, and if they're going to try to compete this year, and Santander does definitely adds depth to that lineup. And this is the Teoscar Hernandez replacement that we never got
Yeah.
with them, and I think that they kind of needed that. So good on the Blue Jays for getting one done. And Anthony Santander turned his, what some, he's somebody that was never really a top prospect, never really he was pretty unheralded for most of his career up until the last couple of years. So good on him for turning it into a big payday.
Yeah, he really broke out in 2022 when he had that 33 homer season there. And it's put up 3 seasons at a 119 WRC plus or above since then. So I think this is sort of a story of like a late bloomer who I think he's going to be a guy who hits around 240 or 230 to 250 somewhere around there for you. He doesn't walk a ton, but he walks fine. But he's a power bat, right? He's going to be a guy who he can hit you 30 plus homers. I mean, this year he had 44 homers. Um, so the Blue Jays had to get somebody in there. It was always going to be hard with the uncertainty around the rest of that lineup, right? Like their two big stars can be free agents next year. You have George Springer already on the tail end of his career as well. Like so, it's interesting. I think his fit in that top four, I think, is going to be pretty decent
Yeah.
with Springer, Vlad, Santander, and Bichette. I think that's good, but it just the rest of this team really feels like it's still lacking.
Yeah.
So I just didn't know if like giving Santander 110 million. I mean, they had to give it to somebody to try and start some sort of a a not a rebuild, but like some sort of a base moving
I mean,
forward if you lose both of your guys. But I just don't know if Santander is the guy you should be doing that with.
yeah. I mean, he's not some kind of like star player to build around.
Yeah.
If you've got a really good team already, this contract fits better because you can kind of plug him into his role and do really well. And I think the Blue Jays do have talent still. I mean, you mentioned the guys they have. I mean, Springer can still play when he's healthy. Vlad Jr. had his renaissance year last year. He's looking for a big year this year. Bo Bichette had a bad year last year, but he's still, a really talented shortstop that's, has a great track record, and they've got some pieces here to work with. It's just a matter of, you know, does this move really like move the bar that much for them? I mean,
Yeah.
it's better than what they had, but I don't really know the answer to that. So, and I do think there's upside here because it's very possible that Anthony Santander has a season in him where he, does walk, a little bit more because teams get scared of his, power, and he, has a higher batting average on balls in play than he had this year, which has always been low, but he might have one year where it's around 300 and he hits for a higher average. So, I mean, there is a 5 WAR player in here somewhere, I think, but it's just not likely at this point. I think he kind of is what he is, a 2 to 3 win player who's going to be a really good corner outfielder. So I mean, I like Anthony Santander, and I think it's, I'm not going to criticize the Blue Jays for signing him, but
Right.
yeah, it's going to be we'll see what happens. I'm interested in see how he does, and Toronto is going to be a team that's really interesting this year because of just with this top end talent that they have. There's a world where they all have a great year and the Toronto's back in the playoffs, but there's also a world where it's a disaster. So it's going to be very interesting to see this team this year.
Yeah, a lot of uncertainty for sure, especially in that division right now. But before we move on, Austin says, "How's it going, guys? Thanks for the show." Austin, welcome in. Thanks for being here. Um, Hope you are getting ready for some Hall of Fame talk because that's where we are going to transition to next. So I think first what we should do is do a real quick rundown of what our ballots would be, just real quick. I have David's right here. So he picked Bobby Abreu, Carlos Beltran, Felix Hernandez, Andrew Jones, Alex Rodriguez, CC Sabathia, Ichiro Suzuki, Chase Utley, Billy Wagner, and Ben Zobrist, using all 10 of his votes for this one. He didn't give us any real analysis. So, David, if you're in the chat right there, give us if you want to say something outside of your Ben Zobrist deserves more votes and he didn't get one. But I think it's pretty similar to what mine would be. I think that I would probably take Zobrist off in mine, and I would probably put um, Manny. I If you're going to vote for A Rod, I feel like Manny also needs to be on there. If you're going to vote for one PED guy, put both. But outside of that, I think it's really dang close to what I would do. I like Abreu, Beltran, Felix, Andrew Jones, um, and then CC Ichiro. I think Utley's the other one you could talk about too, but him and J Roll and a couple other guys on there, I think are kind of where my back end discussion is for that last like vote or two. But obviously, I think Billy Wagner deserves to be in as well. So
Yeah. Yeah, I would have Billy for sure. Ichiro and CC, all three of the guys that got in would have been on mine. We could talk about those three guys real quick. Billy Wagner had like a 2.31 career ERA as a reliever, which is Hall of Fame worthy. Although it's hard for relievers to get in. I think you look at Ichiro, and obviously he was the one vote from being unanimous to get in, so that was pretty cool for him. And CC Sabathia, 3,000 strikeouts, and if you have 3,000 strikeouts without a PED suspension, then you're a lock. So unless you have like a 6 ERA or something, which if you have 3,000 strikeouts, you don't have that. So those three guys I would definitely had on my ballot. I would have had Andrew Jones for sure. I think he got close to 70% this year, so I think he'll eventually get in. But he was one of the greatest defensive outfielders of all time, maybe the greatest, and he hit 430 career home runs. So, I mean, I don't know how you could leave him off. He had more WAR than any of the other guys who got in this year for his career. And then I would have voted for Carlos Beltran. I know the sign stealing thing is a big reason people aren't voting for him. That was the last year of his career, and I do get that because he was the ringleader of that.
yeah,
It wasn't like that was, I think it's harder for me to hold, how's Jose Altuve or Alex Bregman, accountable for that as it is for Carlos Beltran. I definitely think that's a big deal, but I think you just got to vote for him. He's probably the best non-steroid player on the ballot. And then I would have voted for Chase Utley. I think just as a sabermetric guy, I think he was just so elite for the 5 or so years. He put up over 60 WAR. I think that's kind of especially for a second baseman, that's really incredible.
yeah.
I know he was not very well liked, and of course I wasn't a huge fan, but with him being a Philly, but I think you kind of had to put him. And I'm with you on Bobby Abreu. I would have had him too. I think he's a great. I think he's a great player. I think he's very underrated. People don't really realize how great he was. kind of your prototypical leadoff guy. Got on base extremely well, stole a lot of bases, hit some home runs, was on some good teams. He never performed in the playoffs. I think is a big reason why he's gotten left off of a lot of ballots. But other than those guys, I mean, the steroid guys, I get they come up every year, and luckily this year, I think my biggest hard line on the steroid guys is if they served a suspension, I won't vote for them. So, because that means that they were doing it when it was known to be cheating, and that's what A-Rod and Manny Ramirez fall into. Um, so I definitely am on that, and I'm not a huge Andy Pettitte guy, and he was a PED guy as well, but I just wasn't a huge Andy Pettitte guy. I think he's kind of one of those volume guys who gets a lot of credit because he was a Yankee. I don't think he was ever all that great of a pitcher. I mean, he was a good pitcher, don't get me wrong, but I don't think he was ever like some kind of, insanely good pitcher. A career 3.85 ERA. That's like a number 3 pitcher, so um, I, I think it's a good ballot. You could talk me into some other guys. You could probably talk me into the steroid guys still. I mean, they were all good players, and Alex Rodriguez especially would have been an inner circle first ballot Hall of Famer without the steroids. But I just have a hard time voting for him because of he served a full season suspension for cheating. I mean, that just doesn't. It's hard for me to vote for somebody like that.
Yeah, I feel like Pettit is for me. I'm not a big Pettit guy either, but like I understand people's argument
Yeah.
around it, right? I just think that like so there's a way that I say this every year, and there's a way I look at it. Obviously, I think there's certain circumstances where like favorites obviously get more love than other people do, but I always look at it as like if you during an era of baseball, if you look at somebody and can you tell a story of that part without those guys, right? Like I feel like a big part of the 2000s were the A Rod, Manny Ramirez. And then you go into the early, later 2000s into the 2010s, and like Felix is one of the best pitchers in
Yeah.
baseball. So I feel like that. Chase Utley was a big guy, with that those Phillies teams as well. I mean, obviously J Roll, but I just feel like a lot of those guys. Carlos Beltran was one of the best players, around. That was just not really as heralded as much, but still was really dang good. So that's kind of where I look at it there. I feel like Pettit is just right on the back end of that for me. Like if you told me, hey, you can vote for how many ever players you want on the ballot at a time, I feel like I probably would end up picking Pettit. But like I just find myself in the scenario where like I come to 10 and then it's like Pettit's always 12.
Yeah.
That's how I always feel about it for me for some reason, but I understand that people do there. But um yeah, so I mean, you kind of hit on it a little bit, but let's talk about the actual voting and how it ended up coming out. So Ichiro got 99.7% of the votes. He missed unanimous by one vote again. Or I say again, but it's just like Derek Jeter. He missed it by one vote from being unanimous there. CC Sabathia got 86.8% of the votes. Billy Wagner in his final year there got 82.5% of the vote. And then Carlos Beltran in his third year got 70.5, and Andrew Jones in his 8th year got 66.2. And then we hit a major cliff down to Chase Utley, who got 39.8% of his votes there in his second year. So you could probably see a world where Beltran, Jones get in next year. I don't know exactly right this moment who's the first year guys there, but still a lot of work for other guys down this list like Chase Utley and stuff to get in. But what were there any real surprises for you outside of maybe the one person, whoever it is, anonymously not voting for Ichiro?
Not really. I mean, I'm not surprised because of the way voting's gone over the past several years, but I'm bewildered as to why Andrew Jones hasn't been elected at this point. And I mean, I understand, the Carlos Beltran thing. I understand that. Although I think, like I say, I think he's the best non-steroid player on the ballot. But I understand the sign stealing thing. That makes it hard for me too. Um, I mean, I was a little bit surprised that CC got in on the first ballot for some reason. I figured he'd eventually get in. I was just, for some reason, I was a touch surprised about that. I think, CC at the end of his career tailed off a little bit, and he played for probably longer than he should have. And, I think that he probably didn't leave um, the best, like, lasting,
Yeah.
opinion of him because of that. But, um, he was obviously in his prime, incredible, put up the numbers to be in there. Chase Utley, I'm a little surprised isn't higher, but I think some of the like traditional counting stats for him, like he doesn't have 2,000 hits, is a big thing with him.
Yeah.
I think that really hurts his case, although I would have voted for him, and I think he will eventually get in. I mean, he gained what, like 9% this year of what he had
Something.
last year,
Yeah, something.
so I think he'll eventually get in. But yeah, I mean, I think I definitely I wasn't super surprised about any of it. So
Should should we count that Chase Utley has 204 hit by pitches, so he has 1,885 hits? We should just count that he's close enough to 2,000, right?
yeah,
Like he would have got.
there
He
you
would
go.
just factor a little bit, right? We need to
Yeah,
do
I mean,
something there.
like we say, he had a high on base percentage too. He got on base a lot more than some of these guys with 2,500
Yeah,
hits. So, I mean,
yeah,
that's a big thing to remember.
yeah. I think a lot of it's just that like people take his availability really, but then also like the last 4 years of his career, really it was like 2015 and then 2018 because
Yeah.
his two full time years, or not two full time years, but his 2 years with the Dodgers where he played over 100 games with them, he was 96 WRC plus. He was still a positive WAR player, but regardless, yeah, I think looking at the voting there, Ichiro I think should have been unanimous. Obviously, I'm not surprised that CC got in the first year. I think I'm a little surprised that he was up as high as he was. I thought he would be somebody who kind of came in around the 75% mark. Um, and coming in at almost 87 was just a little bit tad surprising to me, but I mean, it's well deserved. I think he's a Hall of Fame level player.
Oh yeah.
Um, Billy Wagner finally getting in his 10th year, like absolutely deserved. I don't know what took people 10 years to finally come to the realization
Yeah.
that he's a Hall of Famer, but
Yeah. It's just the final, like, you look at Billy Wagner, it's the reliever thing without having a ton of postseason success. I think typically in the past, the relievers who have gotten in early were like Mariano Rivera or somebody who closed out multiple World Series and just had all these postseason moments. Because that's really what you remember relievers from. But obviously, I'm with you. Billy Wagner deserves to be there.
yeah, I just have a hard time thinking like the one thing that I can't stand is using like let's say even for Billy Wagner, it's what 1 6 2/3, 7 2/3.
Yeah,
Like it's under 10 postseason innings where he was like really, really bad. Because if you look at some of his other ones, he was good during those postseasons. I just hate using, hey, these 10 innings in the postseason don't like we use that so much more than your 903 career innings that has a 231 ERA against it and you were dominant. I hate that we do that. Like, and I hate that people factor in bad postseason performances as a part of like the to vote if you get in or not. Like it's probably going to be the absolute reason why Clayton Kershaw isn't a unanimous Hall of Famer either. Somebody's going to be like, "Well, he's bad in the postseason," and it's like,
well,
so
Verlander
what?
too.
Yeah, even Verlander. It's like, but so what? Like I just
Yeah,
they're the careers the sample size of their full career in the
yeah.
regular
Well,
season should matter a lot more than I think people
yeah.
give it a lot of credit for.
Well, it's one thing too if you're played for a team like the Yankees in the early 2000s or something like Mariano Rivera, and you come out and you play in the postseason every single year for 10 years, 15 years.
Right.
You
Yeah.
have a pretty big track record in the postseason of, like, you're a really good postseason pitcher or you're not. And of course Mariano Rivera blew the World Series twice, so you got to remember that. But Billy Wagner just didn't have that many appearances. He played for a lot of teams that were either not great, or just for whatever reason he just didn't have a ton of moments either way. And just having one or two bad ones, like he could have had 20 good ones in a row if he was in the postseason 20 more times, like some of these guys. So I don't think you can really hold it against him either.
Yeah.
But I get why, especially with relievers, I do understand, like, how do you determine their value? It's probably more on just like your win probability and championship probability added more than WAR, because they just don't pitch that many innings,
Right.
and that can really be a big deal if even if you're even if it's a small sample size. Relievers are just going to be a small sample size thing. So, but I'm with you. I would have, obviously I would have voted for Billy Wagner, and I'm glad he got in. He
Yeah,
was a great pitcher, and he deserves it.
absolutely. Um, so I think that's really that. So I wanted to look at the 2026. Just look forward to see who the newcomers were
Yeah,
going to be.
and I have not seen this, so you're gonna have to list them
Um,
out for me.
oh, I will. Let me just say, I think there might be one
Yeah,
newcomer on the ballot that would get in. And that is Cole Hamels. And I'm not even
right.
sure he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. I think he should eventually be in. He's over 50 WAR, close to 52 WAR, if I remember right.
It's gonna be
Um,
borderline on that one.
yeah, so I think eventually he might get in. He has like a 3.43 ERA. So, anyways, he's the first guy on the list. The second guy is Ryan Braun. Don't think
He,
Ryan Braun
he's got no
gets in,
shot.
especially with that PED suspension.
Yeah,
Alex Gordon, don't think he
great
gets in.
player, not a Hall of Famer.
Shin Soo Choo,
Not a good player, not a underrated player, not a Hall of Famer.
Edwin Encarnacion.
No,
Hold
he
on,
has 400 homers, but
real
no,
quick. Shin Soo Choo is still playing, by the way. Like not in MLB, but
he's
like
playing in
in
Korea.
Korea. Yeah, that
Oh, I didn't
I think
realize that.
I think he's just finishing up, or he's just getting ready to retire. But wild. Anyways,
Yeah,
Edwin Encarnacion. We said that. Hunter Pence, probably not.
no,
Matt Kemp,
definitely
um,
not.
Rick Porcello, definitely
Definitely
not.
not.
And then the also possibly joining the ballot list is Daniel Murphy, Howie Kendrick, Nick Markakis, Gio Gonzalez, Jason Kipnis, Matt Wieters, Jeff Samardzija, Kelvin Herrera, and Chris Davis from the Orioles. So that's your adding potentially
It
to the
sounds like the
20.
Hall of Fame list of bad contracts.
Yeah, just yeah. So I would say the only one who probably gets enough votes to maybe even stay on the ballot is going to be Cole Hamels.
Yeah, I think he'll
Um,
stay on the ballot, but
moving
I
in
don't think. I think
forward.
he's going to have a hard time getting in. I do
Yeah,
think what that means is hearing that list. I think it does help some guys because
next year. Yeah.
I think there are a few. Since we still had steroid guys on the ballot, I believe that at least A-Rod and Manny go off this year, right? This is their
No,
last A-Rod.
A Rod's only in his fourth year.
I don't know why I thought
Um,
A-Rod was already.
yeah,
Um,
Manny is in his ninth, so he's
okay,
still
he's
on the
got one. Oh,
ballot
I see.
next
Yeah.
year.
Okay.
Wagner was the only one
Wagner.
that's going to
Yeah.
fall off
Yeah.
outside of, and so all the guys that stay on the ballot for next year are going to be Beltran, Andrew Jones, Chase Utley, A Rod, Manny Ramirez, Pettit, Felix, Bobby Abreu, Jimmy Rollins, Omar Vizquel, uh, Dustin Pedroia, Mark Burley, K Rod, David Wright, and Torrey Hunter are all the guys who got above 5% to stay
Yeah.
on. So,
I mean, I'm with you on you know with the three guys that got in. You've got three spots opening on some ballots. I think it'll help Andrew and um, probably Abreu out a little bit. I don't think Abreu's got too much of a chance to get
no,
in, but
he's only down, he's at
yeah,
19.5% in his
yeah,
sixth
yeah.
year on the
But
ballot.
Andrew, I think Andrew gets in next year, or if not next year, he'll get in his last year.
Yeah, it's also I don't understand why there's so much like why people don't like Bobby Abreu to that
Yeah,
level. Like
I mean, if you look at his just overall, like he doesn't have a huge milestone of
he's
anything. He doesn't
400
have,
stolen bases,
yeah. I mean, that's
close
nice,
to
but
300 homers.
it's kind of a conglomeration. Bobby Abreu is the perfect example of a player who is underrated because he was in the era he was in, didn't appreciate the advanced statistics like we do
Yeah,
now. I think if you go back and look at his numbers and everything, he is definitely a Hall of Famer. 60 WAR, you
yeah,
know, all these, all
almost
the
a
on base
400 on
percentage, the
base,
400 on base percentage. I mean, he was an excellent player. I
almost
think that
2,500 hits.
yeah, I think the biggest thing about him is just that, you go back in time and you look at the teams he was on and stuff, and he was just he wasn't really highly thought of as like the best player on his teams, that kind of thing. I mean, I think it's more of I think the reason he's not getting higher now, like I say, I am of the opinion that he should be in the Hall of Fame. I
Yeah,
think you are too. I think the biggest problem that Abreu has is just that the lack of fame. I mean, it's just not. He was never like in some ways he's kind of like Kenny Lofton, who should obviously be in the Hall of Fame as well. where it's like he was always kind of the second or third best player on his team for a long time on really good teams. So, I definitely am of the opinion that Bobby Abreu should be in, but I'll be shocked if he gets in at this point.
Yeah, I don't think so at this point. And then one last one that I wanted to kind of hit on and get in. Let's go some back and forth. I know it was only his first year on the ballot, but were you surprised that Felix was down at 20%? Because I was a little bit surprised.
Not really. I think Felix was
You got a fan again.
hey, raving Ron Swanson.
Okay.
I love the name, but yeah, Felix is he's 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 somebody who lacks the longevity. I think he had that peak where he had the two like unbelievable years, and he had some other really good years in there, but he just lacks the overall he's under he's at 54 Fangraphs WAR, which is nice. You kind of look at his last several years. He really put up most of that in like a 5 or 6 year span.
We had a
He's
10-year
borderline
run.
for me. He was obviously just awesome. He also, I think it's going to hurt him that he never pitched in the postseason at all.
Yeah.
Was on a lot of really bad teams in Seattle in their drought. Um, but I mean, I like Felix Hernandez, and I think that if he got in, I wouldn't be disappointed. I mean, I didn't have him on my ballot for this year, but I could be talked into it, and I would not be disappointed if he got in.
Yeah, he's just one of those guys. Like I said, when I look at it, it's like he was one of the best pitchers in baseball during that
Yep.
that 10-year span where he was elite. He was one of the 10 best, like, or not 10 best. He was one of the best during that 10
Yeah.
years. I feel like he should be in, and he shouldn't be docked because his teams were bad.
Oh, I agree.
Like King's Court there in Seattle was
Oh,
one of the coolest things
that was
ever.
cool, and he also just from a standpoint of when he was healthy in the middle of his career in his prime, he put up like 6 years in a row with more than 5 WAR, which is difficult to do, and he was also a workhorse. He put up 200 innings like 7 or 8 years in a row, and you don't see that very often anymore. And I think that's kind of at the end of his career. What might have got him a little bit was just the overall workload he had dealt with. Because down the stretch, you look at 2017, 2018, 2019 had 3 really bad years in a row. And I think that's another thing too, that right now that's kind of fresh in people's memory with him being early on the ballot.
Yeah.
But I think as time goes by, people will kind of look back at him for the Cy Young year he had, the perfect game he threw, the
Yeah.
6 years in a row with more than 5 WAR, the season where he threw 250 innings and had a 2.27 ERA in 2010.
Yeah.
The season in 2014 where him and Corey Kluber duked it out for the Cy Young, and he had a 2.14 ERA at 235 innings.
Yeah.
I think that's the kind of things people will end up looking back on. At 20% in your first year, he definitely has a good chance to eventually rise up some on the ballot. But I'm not totally surprised that he wasn't higher right at this point.
I thought he'd be a little bit higher. I thought he'd be at
Yeah,
least in the 30s.
30s would have made sense too. I mean, it's so hard to say what these voters and
Yeah.
that's not that big of a difference first year.
A few votes, but still.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty much going to wrap it up here. I don't think we have anything else to really pressing talk about at this moment. Like I said, if you didn't see the Roki Sasaki video, go check that one out. Go get our thoughts. If you're looking for more in-depth analysis about that, we have our special video regarding that. And then we're on our team previews grind, so we're gonna get another one recorded here in the next couple days.
Yep.
And get that out. I think it's going to be the Nationals.
I think it's the A's.
Is it A's? Okay.
I think it's the A's.
I know Nationals is pretty not far behind.
A's
well,
and then Nationals, I think, are currently the order, unless something changes with guys getting signed or something.
Yeah. So be on the lookout for that. Make sure you follow along on all the social media platforms here. Follow, like, subscribe. Let us know what you follow. Follow us on TikTok. We're
welcome
trying
back,
to
TikTok.
Yeah, welcome back, TikTok.
Missed you for about 3 hours.
While it still lives, go follow us over there as we try and get that a little bit bigger to give another place where we can go live on over there. So Matt, you are a hot topic tonight right before we sign off. Someone thinks you are just out of this world. All right.
Everyone knows it.
What can we do?
I mean, it's out of control, man.
This comment section
I
is
get that
going wild.
all the time.
Yeah, I bet you do. It's just all day long about that. So for our podcast listeners, just go watch the YouTube at the end to go see what was said there. But anyways, thank you guys for tuning in to this episode of the Bat Flip Podcast, and we'll catch you guys back not next week, in 2 weeks.
Thanks, everybody.